Hello, and thank you so much for taking the time out to listen. So, today I titled this message, Things You'll Want to Ask Your Parent Before He or She Passes Away. We're also going to talk about grandparent as well. And the reason for this is because I personally just feel a pressing need to talk with someone about their conversation that they need to have with their father. I've already had my share of conversations when I went in and out of Pennsylvania. That's where my people primarily were. And over the years, I just split up my questions. I split them up. I got enough information. And then when the time came that people had to leave, I didn't feel pressed about it. I really didn't. I know for some individuals, they're like, well, I'm not like that. And my parent, they're not like that. They don't really like to talk. Well, I will tell you that they may not like to have a long conversation, but you can get some questions in, some very short questions. They may say yes or no. They may say, what do you want to know that for? They may say a number of things. I wrote this book years back called Genealogy X. And the thing about this book was to motivate, to encourage, to inspire people to have conversations with their family so that they could be at peace, so that they could be able to help others within the family, no longer carry generational abuses, be victims, all of that other stuff that sometimes we just don't see it at the time growing up. And then as we get older and then we, sit back and observe some things, we realize this was toxic. This was messy. This was good. This was nice. I appreciate what they did. And then being able to even say that as well, because I did have those conversations. So I'm not the person who, when people started passing away, and I've told you all that many family members have passed away, I wasn't the one filled with regret. People like to put their mess on you because they're going through it. But that's not what I was doing, sitting back and freaking out about some things. Sure, I was saddened, but I wasn't about to lose my mind, lose opportunities, lose my life, be all in my feelings with my children. I wasn't going to do all of that because I knew that just as they had a start date, they have an end date, and so do we. So you might as well just be inspired to ask the type of questions that maybe you didn't even think about. And I'm going to share some of those questions that I asked privately as well as publicly to various family members. There are a couple of them on the channel where I interviewed them, and they're no longer with us. So you see, that's why it's so important to have conversations, because you never know the day or the hour that a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, a cousin, an auntie, an uncle, your favorites are going to check out of here. And the way things have been looking, at least the past 5 years, there is quite a few people that's visiting headstones, okay? And there's going to be more headstones. And so I once again felt a pressing need to speak to some people about having a conversation with the family members, as well as those that you love, that are, some of your favorites. Maybe they're not biological family members, but hey, they feel like family. They might even look like family. Let's get into the biblical verses first, and then we'll get into those questions. Proverbs 1 verses 8 and 9 in the NIV Bible says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck." This wisdom, if they bothered to sit down and have that conversation, whatever that might be, that goes with you when you go off to the university. That goes with you when you get married. That stays with you while you're going through the struggles in that marriage, right? This type of information will go with you to your job. When you're down and out, when you are feeling blue, your mother's voice, your grandmother's voice, your grandfather, your father's voice, you will hear it at times. Sometimes that voice is nothing but the Lord, but he knows he can get your attention by using the voice of those loved ones. So don't ever look at wisdom, warnings, instructions, and all of that, especially for younger people, because I know older people who listen, you already know, you already know better. But for the younger people, don't always get in your feelings and have a nasty little attitude, because once again, your father is correcting you. Your mother is instructing you, okay? That relative that you love so much is telling you something, and now you want to do a disappearing act because you're all in your feelings, you see. Sometimes it can be the child or the grandchild that's coming with some information. And this is what will just stir your emotions a little bit. God may be calling that son, that daughter, that grandson or granddaughter home before you. And sometimes he's going to use a young person to advise you, correct you, instruct you. And then that person is gone. So I know there's some people in this circle, and I'm not putting anything on anybody. I am just saying that they're going to lose a loved one. And it isn't always the older people. Sometimes it's the younger. Deuteronomy 32:7. Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father and he will tell you. Your elders and they will explain to you. When we ask these questions, sometimes we're met with, I don't know, I don't remember, why do you want to know, and all this. That's on them if they don't want to give up the information. That's on them if they want to play like. There was a lot of that went on too. I just acted like, I just played like I didn't remember, I didn't recall, because you know these kids, they don't need to know anything, because all they going to do is go on that social media and they going to say this and that. And no, I wasn't about to let nobody get any pictures because, well, you know. Meanwhile, the younger generation don't know those people that's in the photographs. They don't know those people in the video. Hello. And then there's so many, and I'm just going to put it out there. There's so many cheap family members who don't want to spend the money to get some VHS tapes done. They don't want to spend the money to get some photos done. They are so in their feelings, holding all sorts of grudges. I even went to a church, had a speech on this last year about people holding on to things that God called them to let go. Even if it is something that you can't duplicate, like a favorite vase, right? You can't duplicate a fur coat or some shoes or whatever that might be, but you can duplicate video, you can duplicate photos. You can make it available so that it's not just who comes into town or who shows up at the funeral. But God is convicting some individuals on this, and some others, even though they haven't caught the memo yet, they haven't received a word yet, there is a reaping season that shows up because you should have let go, but you chose not to. And now people are gone. People are gone. You can't talk to the sister. You can't talk to the brother. You can't talk to the cousin. You can't talk to the mother. You can't talk to the father. You can't talk to anybody, about anything, because when the opportunity was there for you to ask the hard questions about those photos, about her jewelry, about his favorite cassettes that he used to play back in the day, you chose not to because it was all junk and, oh, well, I don't care. But then when grief hits, it's interesting how much you care. Come on. It's interesting how much people care. Now they're picking up the phone. Now they want to know about, well, do you have this? Were you able to talk to so-and-so? What about this person and that one? And then when you tell them there's certain people that I'm not talking to right now, they're like, well, wait a minute. Well, what happened? Because they knew that you were the lock and key that was going to get somebody something. And now they can't get anything. And sometimes people hold grudges and they get all in their feelings and they call themselves trying to, hurt somebody by doing this. But when God is moving on people to ask and you're the one that's holding things and you don't want to let go, well, the problem is on you. And there is a problem coming. Many. I am a seer. I tell people this. I give you prophetic messages. Sometimes they're visual. Sometimes they're in audio. And it's a warning to those who know that, yes, there's no doubt about it. We're talking about you. You see, you don't just happen to come across a message. You don't just happen to tune in. There's something on the inside that will move you to be able to listen to something, receive that, and do something about it. Job 8 and verses 8 through 10 in the NIV once again. Ask the former generation, okay? Lord Jesus, ask the former generation and find out what their ancestors learned. For we were born only yesterday. You see, in the eyes of God, it was just yesterday. I know you 30, 40, 50, 60 plus years old. Okay. But in God's eyes, you was just born only yesterday. I was born only yesterday and know nothing. And our days on earth are but a shadow. Isn't this just a humbling message? Woo, it hits me right in my spirit. And for some of you all, I got to repeat it because you were distracted. You weren't paying close attention. Ask the former generation and find out what their ancestors learned. For we were born only yesterday and know nothing. And our days on earth are but a shadow. Can I tell you that a lot of the top tier, top level, the people who are in the highest offices of the land, they know a lot about their history. I don't know about some of you all, but they know a lot about their history. They know a lot about American history. And this is why they can be able to do the types of things that they do. And they have circles around them that do what? Ask questions. They ask questions. So if the reporters can ask the president questions, then why is it that that person in the next room isn't asking questions? You know why? Because sometimes there's conversations that are off limits and you said it in so many ways. When you eye rolled, when you deep sighed, when you told them go ahead on somewhere, when you didn't like their response, when you didn't appreciate the fact that they shared the last information with their sibling, or they shared some information with a relative that maybe you didn't want them to share. You can't control information as much as you want to, but you can't, because there's some information that God himself will move on a young person to go and ask the question. And then when they ask the question and you answer, well, surprise, surprise, they got some information for you that will give you peace of mind. And for some people, your peace of mind is not going to come until after there are more headstones. Stay with me. You see, because you didn't hurt enough in the last, Lord Jesus, you didn't hurt enough in the last funeral, at the last funeral. You didn't hurt enough. You didn't suffer enough. All of the issues that happen within the family, it didn't move the needle for you to ask the hard questions. You still fearful. You still worried. As grown as you are. Well, Mama said what? Daddy said what? We got a lot of spineless believers. I'm telling you right now, they are not frontline soldiers. And some of you all know who they are because you went and you asked them some questions. Well, what did Uncle say? What did Grandma say? What did the greats say? What is it that you know about? Scratching their head. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this. As you get older, you forgot what you're supposed to hold on to. You forgot what you were supposed to keep quiet. And God says it's all coming out. It's all coming out. And more information comes out publicly when you don't want to deal with things privately. Lord Jesus, I'm coming where some people are. More and more information comes out publicly when you don't want to deal with things privately. Your children tell it. The grandchildren tell it. Oh, it might skip those 2 generations, but the great-grands are on fire for it. Hello. And sometimes with this sophisticated technology, you may ask the sophisticated technology all sorts of questions, and then they come back with, this is the reason why they don't say. This is the reason why they don't do this. Oh my goodness. It will unpack the family. And then you got peace of mind through sophisticated technology. My God, you got peace of mind sitting in front of a psychologist. Somebody else got peace of mind when they sit with a spiritual counselor. Somebody else, a Christian minister. So many people are getting their peace of mind. Oh, you don't want to help out? You don't want to give any information? You think that you're dangling carrots and sticks and all this other stuff? God says that I'm taking the power, I'm taking the favor, I'm taking all that you have, and I'm giving it over to someone else. And in some cases, some of it burns up in fire. Some of you all know all too well. You learn that the hard way. And there's people that don't want to talk to you. They don't want to deal with you or anything else, because back when you could have gave, you didn't. You didn't. You found every excuse under the sun, and now nobody has anything. Woo, Lord Jesus. So let's get into some of the questions, shall we? This is a question you can ask a parent. Okay. I listened to an old cassette where I had a project back when I was in college, and I was asking my mother a bunch of questions, and I unearthed it, played it, and I was like, well, there it is right there. So I got me peace of mind, once even more peace of mind. I already had peace of mind about some things when I seen her face to face, and then got even more peace of mind when I unearthed that cassette. Hallelujah, and praise be to the one true God. You see? And this is what happens once again when you don't connect with people, when you don't know what's going on, when you got your little issues, you miss out on the gifts that people have. And some of you all, you're gifting some people because they reach out and they touch. But other people, they're too stuck in their feelings. So, oh well. So we've got some other information that we want to ask is, parents, what do you want people to remember about you? What do you want people to remember about you? And this was a question that I asked, but in more detail. And it was more about, what she chose to give was more about back in the day and her growing up. So I had to rephrase some questions. But there are those who don't mind talking about themselves, so they don't mind answering that question, especially if they focus in on the things that are positive, that make them look good, you see, that make their own parents look good. Okay, that's a one-sided story though. So don't just ride on the positivity. We need to know about hardships. We need to know about challenges too. Another question, and this was one that I asked of one of the uncles who had given his life to Christ. And I rephrased it to fit more of the conversation. But basically, I asked him what were some of the lessons that he learned in his life that he unfortunately had to learn the hard way. You can rephrase it any way you want. But basically, what is the most important lesson that you learned prior to becoming a believer? Or what was the lesson that drove you into becoming a believer, you see? And so he went on and he told a lot of very, deep things. I was surprised. But he was at a place in his life where he didn't care what his brothers thought. He didn't care what his sisters thought. He was going to tell his story. He was going to tell on some other folk, and he was going to get his peace of mind. Some things were on the record. Some things were off the record. Another question that was asked, and mind you, these questions will fall under one's legacy, right? Who they are, identifying with them. You might even have a closer relationship with some of these individuals. I continued to converse with many of them prior to their passing, okay? And not everybody was getting on the phone saying, I heard from Nikki, you see? Because that's the name that everybody knows. You all know Nicole. So there wasn't always that was going on, but there was still communication. And for a long time, I wrote letters before I had, the phone calls and all of that. And they appreciated those letters. And some of you all, that is something that you haven't done in many, many years. And being that the post offices are slowly but surely going away in some areas, you might want to drop a letter or two in the mail, just for old time's sake. All right. What is something that you're most proud of in your life? Okay. And some individuals will tell you that it was when a baby was born, when they got married, when they got their first job, when their dad allowed them to do something, or when their mom took them on a trip somewhere. Okay. So expect those type of responses. And it's usually those that they feel comfortable talking about. But then there are those proud moments that they had with an ex, or a proud moment that they had with someone who they were called to no longer be with. And so those things they'll hold on to, you see. That's not for you, that type of thing. Is there anything that, now this is for a parent, right, that you're really close to, or maybe not so, but somebody who you're comfortable with? Maybe it's not a parent. But is there anything that you haven't told me that we need to discuss? Something that, well, what do you mean? Like just something that maybe you wish you could have done over, something that you wish you would have bought, a place that you always wanted to go, you see. So I've had those sorts of questions. Once again, choosing, they usually would choose the question that they were most comfortable in responding to. We got into faith. We talked about their values. We talked about their moral compass, right? Their belief system. Some of them did not have a faith. They just said things like, I know right from wrong. I'm not into God like that, or I'm not into God like you. But, and even the tone of voice, it was sometimes hard to have these conversations, because once we got into faith, there was a shift and they weren't so nice. And that's when I started to probe a little bit and found out that some people had a difficult time growing up, going to church. Others, as they got older, they were judged by church members. There were those who were hypocrites, and they just played two sides of the fence, and they didn't like being called out on some things. So that was my observation, my understanding from why there was this sudden hostility. And some of them were still in sin. I mean, I talked about pimp, player, hustler, liars, gamblers, drunkards. Some of them still in the mess when I was having these conversations. So we're just keeping it real 100. And some people, even to this day, still haven't changed. They're still about that life. But I was curious just to see if there was some confessing of sin, some repenting, because this way, if they passed away, I'd be at peace. And one particular relative reached out to me and said that, well, when you had these conversations with, and she had specific names, I had one person where I said, oh yeah, he definitely turned from a lot of his wickedness. But the other one, no. And she started crying because she knew Bible. She knew Bible. And some of you all know Bible too. This might be a good opportunity when you're having these conversations to talk to them about, have you considered on walking with the Lord? When's the last time that you sat down and had a conversation with, God? Have you attended church in a while? What has been your experience with people of faith? Your experience with attending church? Did you ever hold any roles while you were in church? And you'll be surprised. Sometimes people will tell you some things and you're like, what? You used to be a choir boy. So one of the questions for those who were believers, I asked them, and you will hear me when I'm interviewing my relative and also an evangelist on the interview playlist series on this channel. There's interviews where I interview people, and it's audio, faceless, but you hear their voices. I asked something along the lines of, how did you come to believe in God? You know, well, why did you get to a place where you wanted to walk with the Lord? What happened? You see, do you, there's been those conversations with people offline where I'm like, well, do you pray? Right? And how is prayer significant in your life? You know, is it very significant? How much? You know, how important, I should say, how important is prayer in your life? Because some of these questions I'm off the top of my head trying to remember, and other ones I have noted. But they would say something like, well, it's not that important, or it's important. I mean, I pray every now and again, or oh, I pray every day, you know. So there was some of that was going on. I would ask questions like, was there ever a time where you felt the presence of the Lord? I think I asked everybody that at some point, from talking to them over the years, and they would say, yes, there were times when I felt the presence of the Lord. Others was like, maybe when I was a kid. What Bible verse has been very important in your life, that a go-to Bible verse, right? And they would say something like, I know for me, I would give them an example. I would say something like, well, Romans 8:28, to get some people to talk. Because sometimes you do have to give up a little bit of who you are in order to get them to talk, okay? And so I would say, my go-to is Romans 8:28, you know, what is yours? And then they would say, or Romans 8:28, and they would say, oh, well, it's, you know, Psalm 23, it's Psalm 91, you know. So that was very touching, because over the years, when I've read these scriptures, I've studied these scriptures, I've applied them to my own life, I realized why they were go-tos. When it came down to the marriage, the relationships that they had, some of them were not married when I talked with them. And being that they were not people of faith, we kind of skipped past more faith questions, and we just got into, okay, so how long you been with this girlfriend? How long have you been with this boyfriend? You know, what made you connect with this person? There was no judgment. Okay, so as believers, Christians, come on, we got to avoid the judgment. If we're trying to get information, you know, we don't want to be all in the scriptures and talking about, well, you know, you shouldn't be shacking up. They already know that. If they're in a homosexual relationship of some sort, right? They already know it. So there's no sense in getting into all of that. We're trying to get information. And sometimes I will tell you that there may be that shocking statement and you might chuckle, but then let's move on to those questions that we really want. And I would suggest that the most important questions, start with those first, because if the conversation does turn volatile and you do slip up, at least you got your most important questions asked before their child comes in interrupting, or before they get a hold, or before the spouse or the girlfriend or boyfriend get a hold of them and start telling them why did you have that conversation? Why did you tell her that? And then it's best to have those conversations when there is no spouse around, because there was some of that was going on. A spouse would be sitting right next to a person that I'm interviewing, and you could hear the interruption, right? Trying to get them to not say certain things. And sometimes there was a little bit of a disagreement between partners, like, excuse me, this is my interview, you know, that sort of thing. But the question about, you know, how did you learn to love? How did you meet your partner? What is it that keeps your marriage, and whatever they said positive about their marriage, strong, right? What do you do to comfort your partner? What are some things, you know, during, like, it just depends on what the subject might be, you know, during times of conflict. And, you know, we know about the typical intimacy, but some folks had conversations that were very deep. You know, the types of things that they did. And that's why I love my husband, or that's why I love my wife. So you never know. Some of these questions will lead to some very deep conversations, and you'll come away with some information that is so valuable that you might start implementing it in your relationship. What advice would you give me about being a good wife or a good mom, you see? Or for the men, being a good husband, a good father? What made you fall in love with my mom? What made you fall in love with my dad? What is it that just makes you look at her and say, wow, I made the right decision? You know? So there are those questions as well. When it comes down to parenting and family, I asked my mom a lot of different questions related to that in that audio. And she was very candid about the things that she had experienced, but she wasn't very detailed. She also she talked a lot about society. She talked a lot about her observations growing up, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, well, I should say, moving through life, because once she became an adult, she was on her own and she had to figure some things out, but her mom was always available to help her. She also had some various friends over the years and neighbors, and she learned a lot from different people. And there was a lot of talk show watching too back in those days. So she learned some things from talk shows. So some of the questions when it comes to parenting and family, you may ask something like, how did you feel when I was born? That was a dangerous question. I didn't realize it because she was very honest, little too honest, and so some of those words that she said, it just repeated in my head over and over again. And then eventually, as time went on, I was like, okay, let me get some more information from her that's a little more positive, because she didn't have the best experience, through childbirth and the early days of parenting. But for some of you all, you could ask something like, well, what did you want? What did you want for us when we were children? What were some of the things that you thought about? And then they'll go and they'll say, and they'll think about some things. Was there ever a moment when you were just fearful that this just wasn't the right decision? I don't know if I'm cut out for this. What would you do differently as a mother, as a father, as a grandparent, as a grandmother, if you had a chance to do this all over again? And what's some things that you hope for concerning your grandkids? And then it was interesting because I remember one time when she was talking about some of the things that she wanted to leave behind. So the conversations can take this interesting turn. You're thinking that the responses are going to be typical. And then the next thing you know, you get into things like inheritances, and you get into things like financial responsibility, and you start talking about what kind of discipline that they received back in the day and how that impacted their parenting now. So you will unearth quite a bit of information depending on how, the questions are asked and what they're willing to give. I did get into life and death types of questions. So I asked my former mother-in-law, I asked I've asked my husband some interesting questions, and many, many relatives. Sometimes you find yourself being a bit tearful, okay? You might even cut the interview short because you weren't expecting, once again, some of those responses. Some questions that you might want to ask may involve people who they're not necessarily interacting with, dealing with. And so a question like, have you ever thought about making peace with this person? Is there anything that you want to say to me or to my children that you never said? There may be some concern about leaving this earth. And so you might want to ask them some questions like, how do you feel about the news that you received concerning your health? Are you at peace with it? And for some, they were just like, oh, I just put it in God's hands. You see? Or I'm at peace. I'm so over this. And there were questions that I asked when I was little, like, what happens after we go with Jesus? Or what happens when we pass away? I have to be careful on this audio because it seems like whenever you say certain words, things, the algorithms and so forth ding you. But you see what I'm getting at. So there are so many questions that you can ask about life and mortality. All right. Here's some questions that you might want to ask great or grandparents. This was something that I asked my grandmother. What was it like? And I asked so many other people the same question too. What was it like when you were a kid? How did you meet your husband? How did you meet your wife? What are some of the traditions, the family traditions that you miss? What do you see in this generation that really makes you mad? What is it that you see in this generation that really makes you happy? And my grandmother was quite bold. And because I rephrased this and I made it really basic, that last question. And she said, well, I don't see much different. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Not when it comes to the relationships. You still got girls and women being abused and still cooking and cleaning and running around and errands and taking care of kids, and the men sitting there and all these pregnant bellies. So her observations were quite accurate. So sometimes like I said, you never know with some of our elders what they might say, and they may not want to talk about themselves. They may want to talk about everything that they see going on with some other people. Okay. So, wow. I don't know if that's very encouraging, but okay. Proverbs 20:5. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. And that is what you're doing in these conversations. You want to draw the wisdom out, the experience. You want them to describe some things. And that was something that when I started writing some of the family legacy books, I said, wait a minute. I said, I need some descriptions. I need somebody to put me in that time period. So I was asking them questions like, what did you see? What did it smell like? What were you hearing at the time? What was some of the furniture? And some of it, they were able to describe it so well that when I went on the internet, I'm like, oh, okay, yes, I remember the hi-fi when I was little, or I remember the 45s, I remember the LPs. And for some of you all, you might not know what I'm talking about. So, hey, that's a homework assignment. And then some folks were talking about plastic runners on the carpet and plastic on the sofas, and, just taking me to their household growing up. And then, of course, we had commonalities because I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. Yes, my mother, she had plastic on her furniture. She had the plastic runners too. Yep. And we would go back and forth. And now you're building a rapport with someone and they're more likely to answer your questions. You see, we talked about hairstyles. And they would say, back in my day, we used to take the iron and put it on a gas stove. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got my experience. Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah, we hadn't purchased an electric hot comb because they weren't made at that particular time until later. So we were still, putting things on the stove and getting our ears burned. Absolutely. You see, and so once again, something that people can relate to, or the curlers, right? Some of you remember there were the curlers, the steam curlers, right? And sometimes, depending on the texture of your hair, you got your hair tangled in those steam curlers. And then there are others who remember the sponge curlers, right? So when I say these things, your mind starts going back in time. And you remember how beautiful those hairstyles were. You remember the clothing, right? When we start talking about, like, for instance, in the 1990s, cross colors. So somebody goes, oh, yeah, I remember that. And that takes them to a happy place, a happy time. Others remember when you say things like quilts and blankets. And the crocheting, the needling that went on. Oh, yes, I remember. And then your mind goes back to those times where, oh, I love that blanket, or I couldn't stand that blanket. It was so ugly. Or I remember all those little footies that my grandmother made for my baby or my great, or what have you. So some of this, when you approach the conversations with the happy, the positivity, the good old days, that will also show up in the tone of your voice when you're asking questions, right? And once again, people are more likely to talk to you. So I hope that someone's inspired today, okay? I know that, once again, God is moving on someone to do something, right, about these conversations, making them more heartfelt, having the important conversation, unearthing some of the secrets, right? And dispelling the myths. And of course, having that peace of mind so that when that person passes away, well, I'm good over here because I had all these conversations with all these relatives and, took pictures and visited places where they walked and went to school and, all of that cool stuff. So hopefully that will, once again, be just what you need, right? To just, once again, get that peace of mind. Well, I thank you so much for taking time out to listen. You've been listening to YouTube NM Enterprise 7. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment, share, and we do welcome giving on this channel. You're welcome to give. There are links in the description box. Would you? Blessings to you.